The Ant-Man movies are some of the most overlooked movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And for good reason, too. It's not like these are some sort of underrated masterpieces, or some hidden gems that are buried behind movies with bigger heroes, in both popularity and in size.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
However, these movies aren't overrated either. They're just kinda there, and the characters just have their own corner of this ever-expanding universe that's never really affected by the overall story of the MCU, even if they tried to be. Which happens a lot more than I actually realized. And you may think these movies could be some sort of hidden gems for the MCU, but this is not the case. And these movies are, fine I guess? They have their positives, and later on in the franchise, some real negatives that are really hard to overlook. And you can just say, oh, it's an MCU movie. These movies are never good. But Marvel has proven to us that this studio is capable of making some truly amazing films that will stand the test of time as all-time classics. But these movies? Oh hell no. At one point, the third installment was one of the most important films in Marvel's old plans for their multiverse saga. But plans are always changing, and changed they did. And after this film fell short of the studio's expectations, barely breaking even and making the slightest of all slight profits, future installments were quietly cancelled, leading to no real future for Ant-Man in the MCU, except for an appearance in Doomsday. And this even led to huge main players of the franchise like Evangeline Lilly and Michael Douglas retiring from acting altogether after the release of Quantumania. However, in Michael Douglas's case, the dude's 80 years old and was in the industry for roughly 60 years, so he gets a pass for retiring. However, what if I told you that the Ant-Man trilogy could have been so much more, and could have been one of the best movies Marvel had to offer? And that original treatment of the film was called one of the best Marvel scripts from the people working behind the scenes, and could have changed the way that everyday people could have viewed superhero movies in a positive light. But why did this version of Ant-Man inevitably get reworked into the version we know today? And even though there are glimpses of it in the finished product, with some aspects being carried over, but most of the script feels safe and predictable. But why would Kevin Feige do this? And let me tell you, this rabbit hole goes a lot deeper than I truly expected. And today I'll explain what could have been with this franchise, and how this could have been better than anything that the MCU offered. And it all begins with a filmmaker named Edgar Wright. Edgar Wright is an English filmmaker born on April 18th, 1974, in a small town in England. He's best known for making the Cornetto Trilogy, 3 self-contained stories that are a subversion on a specific genre that are all connected from the same repeated passing references to Cornetto ice cream cones. He's also known for directing Scott Pilgrim vs. the World and Baby Driver, all films that are celebrated by fans and critics. But also, Wright is my favorite director, and not only has his films changed my overall perspective on writing and filmmaking as a whole, but his movies are so entertaining for any viewer and keeps his audience engaged throughout the whole runtime. Wright's overall filmmaking style is known for being snappy and kinetic visually, by using specific camera and editing techniques to present his films in new ways that are both inventive and stylistic. And this can be in a scene with very heavy action, or in a scene with just little dialogue between 2 characters, with little details that can be caught on many rewatches. And this style can create comedy just from subtle visual nods that the audience can pick up on through the use of simple staging. If you want to learn more about this, the channel Every Frame a Painting has a great video that goes more in depth about this key detail about his filmmaking style, so I'll leave a link in the description. Plus, his films are inventive and usually play a form of satire on most common genres, that puts a distinctive and new take on these overly played genres that makes them feel fresh and unique again, which is something I haven't seen any other filmmaker accomplish as well as him. So you may be asking, why am I rambling on about this English filmmaker, and how does this connect back to Ant-Man? Well, funny story. Edgar Wright was the original writer and director of this movie. And yes, he was supposed to write and direct this movie. This is something Wright does with all of his films, ever since his directorial debut, from low-budget movies like A Fistful of Fingers, all the way to present with his moderately budgeted movies with big stars attached, like Baby Driver with John Hamm, Jamie Foxx, and never mind. And he's kept this same mindset for exactly 30 years now, and so this is really incredibly important to keep in mind with how he makes movies, and we'll come back later, so remember that now. Even though Wright's version never fully materialized, the finished film still uses a lot of elements from that version. But I believe with a few tweaks and changes that we learned about from this version of the film, this would have gone down as one of the best superhero movies ever. Instead of this franchise being dead in a ditch shot by Kevin Feige himself, this film also served as a passion project in a way for him, because as a kid, Wright grew up with the 1979 issue of Marvel Premiere, featuring Scott Lang as Ant-Man, and this issue served to be his first appearance, which he took heavy inspiration from for his script. To talk about how this version of the film inevitably fell apart, it's really important to discuss the production of this film, and how it eventually leads to Wright leaving the project entirely. And our story begins predating the whole MCU entirely, in 2003, when Artisan Entertainment owned the rights to various Marvel characters. One of those being Ant-Man, which sparked Edgar Wright's attention, and so Wright and his writing partner at the time, Joe Cornish, were offered to write a treatment to pitch for the studio, based on any of the characters they owned the rights for. And at the time, the two wrote a treatment for an Ant-Man movie. And Wright released this statement about this treatment, which goes as the following. We wrote this treatment revolving around the Scott Lang character, who was a burglar, so we could have gone slightly in the Elmore Leonard route. And they came back saying, oh, we wanted to do something like a family thing. I don't think it ever got sent to Marvel. Okay, so there's a lot to process here in this quote alone. I find it interesting that they always had Scott Lang in mind for Ant-Man. So if you're someone who's pissed off that Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne weren't used, then don't blame it on Kevin Feige or anyone else at Marvel Studios. Nope, you only got Wright to blame on this choice. And they bring up Elmore Leonard, which is pretty interesting. He's best known for writing a variety of crime novels focusing on character-based stories. And if I had to guess, for Wright and Cornish's treatment, Lang would have started off as a hardened criminal who becomes more of a hero throughout the runtime of the film, because of the possession of the Ant-Man suit. So you know, a character with an arc throughout the film. Basic scriptwriting 101. Instead of already being a criminal with the heart of gold in the finished film.
They were overcharging the customers, right? And it added up to millions. He blows the whistle and he gets fired. And what does he do? He hacks into the security system and transfers millions back to the people that they stole it from.
Posts all the bank records online.
And he drove dude's Bentley into his swimming pool.
Something else that I find interesting is that this film would have been a heist movie. And yes, the film still maintained this from a very small extent, but it would have been super interesting to see Wright blend his signature style on common tropes in the heist genre, which would have been really fun to see. And instead of Lang's crew consisting of just a few guys in the finished film, the crew would have consisted of 50 people with their own sets of skills that would have benefited the heist, kind of like in the veins of Ocean's 11 in Wright's version. And the rest of the treatment would have focused on elements that we know about in the final product, like an older Hank Pym mentoring Scott Lang, but with less of a focus on the quantum realm. However, Artisan wasn't really that interested in Wright and Cornish's direction for their treatment, with the studio wanting a film for a more family-oriented audience, kinda in the veins of the first X-Men and Spider-Man movies, that were major successes at the time. But with Ant-Man, I don't really know a lot of kids nowadays who love heist movies, and even back then. I would love to be proven wrong though, so bash me in the comments about this. Plus, it's important to consider that Edgar Wright wasn't that popular of a filmmaker just yet, and this was a year before Shaun of the Dead came out and really skyrocketed his career. And Wright was only best known for the cult classic British sitcom Spaced. So I guess Artisan wasn't ready to take that big of a risk with a filmmaker like Wright. However, this is not where our story ends. Far from it, in fact, because a few years went by, and now it's 2006, and slowly but surely, Marvel is regaining a lot of their movie rights to some of their characters. Granted, none of them were heavy hitters at the time, like the X-Men, Hulk, or Spider-Man, but still some classic Marvel heroes nonetheless, that would lay the groundworks for the Infinity Saga. One of those being Ant-Man, since the Artisan film never happened. This means Marvel regained the rights to Ant-Man once again. And this led to Marvel slowly planning a shared universe of interconnected Marvel films based off of characters in the Avengers side of the universe. And this led to Kevin Feige asking Wright, coming off the success of Shaun of the Dead, if he had any interest in pitching a Marvel movie. And he showed Feige the treatment he and Cornish wrote for Artisan. And this served as the basis for a rough outline for their Marvel Studios script. And this meeting must have gone successfully because Ant-Man was announced to be a part of the initial slate of films that would make up the MCU's Phase 1. Alongside Iron Man, Thor, etc. This film would have been more standalone and loosely connected to the overall story of the MCU. and this is how Wright always intended it, and the duo ended up completing their first draft in 2008. But since the film wasn't one of Marvel's biggest priorities at the time, the film would inevitably get delayed until Phase 2. Because of that, Wright went off to do other projects, like directing the box office bomb turned cult classic known as Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, based off of the comic of the same name, which is one of my favorite movies and adaptations in general. And shortly after the release of Scott Pilgrim, Wright turned in a second draft of his Ant-Man script. And a year later, in May of 2012, around the same time as the release of The Avengers, which would be the biggest superhero movie at the time, Marvel enlisted Wright to visualize what Ant-Man would look like on film. And that's what Wright did in June of 2012. Wright shot a test reel for Ant-Man, showing how he would capture the character's shrinking powers on screen. And this test reel was later shown off at that year's San Diego Comic-Con, and later leaked online. And the footage is still pretty easy to find online with just a quick Google search after all of these years. The footage consists of the titular Ant-Man shrinking down and beating up some goons, and even though this footage is less than a minute long, it really shows off the creative direction that Wright wanted to bring to the film, and you can see traces of Wright's filmmaking style with the action feeling snappy and kinetic, like I mentioned from before, and that's common in Wright's other films. And this shows off a fun visual design with Ant-Man shrinking down and running on the gun barrel, and quickly jumping to injure the goon, and then grabbing the other guard in time, shrinking back to normal size, and throwing him through some glass. And then walking into an elevator right when the footage ends, revealing the title card. You can clearly see a lot of passion behind this from Wright, in only less than a minute, and you can clearly see that he wanted to do this character justice. And this footage was still used in the finished film, and in a lot of trailers, seen here. Afterwards, Wright was gearing up to start production again on Ant-Man before the film was inevitably delayed again, so Wright could fast-track the production on the third and final film in his Cornetto trilogy, known as The World's End. Because the producer of the whole Cornetto trilogy, Eric Fellner, was diagnosed with cancer at the time, and Wright felt it was important to fulfill his promise to Fellner to finish the trilogy before the producer's condition worsened. Thankfully, Fellner recovered, and that's awesome, good for him. And so before making Ant-Man again, Wright left to make The World's End, and we would have to wait for a while for Wright to get back to work on the script. And we waited. And waited. Hey, to pass the time, here's a fun fact. Did you know that Joss Whedon wanted to use the Wasp in the original Avengers movie? Yeah, she was included in the original draft of the script, and would have had a very prominent role. More specifically, the Janet Van Dyne version of the character, played by Zooey Deschanel. Don't know how this would have worked with the Ant-Man movie, focusing on Scott Lang with an old man Hank Pym being the mentor, and Pym is most associated with Janet in a romantic fashion, so it would have been one huge confusing mess continuity-wise. But in the end, she was removed because she took up way too much screen time for focusing on a brand new character, being revealed in The Story of Marvel Studios, the Making of the Marvel Cinematic Universe book. It was all about the Wasp, producer Jeremy Latcham said. He wanted to cast Zooey Deschanel, and she was the funniest character in the whole movie, and very well written. And Whedon said, yeah, I took some wrong turns there. The Wasp happened because there was a short period where it looked like we weren't going to be able to get Scarlet due to scheduling conflicts. So I panicked. I thought, hold on, we could do the Wasp. Then I fell in love with that. But then we got Scarlet, and I realized that I had written this entire movie about the Wasp. Oops, I overcompensated there. In the end, I feel like they made the right choice, because the MCU already set up all of these different characters that were built up to come together into one film, and it was definitely the right call to make after all the content that they would be juggling in this one film before feeling overstuffed with a new character. But this was a damn shame, because in the same sense as Sue Storm with the Fantastic Four, Janet is the glue that holds the Avengers together, all the way down to coming up with the name for the team, and it feels like such a missed opportunity that we never got to see her and Hank Pym in a way more prominent role in the Infinity Saga than we ended up getting. Because these two are so damn special and could have played an essential role in this universe so early on. A little off topic, but I thought it was interesting in the end to share nonetheless. Anyways, is Edgar Wright done with The World's End yet? Oh, he is? Good. After all the delays for Ant-Man, Marvel was a very different company, and the studio exploded in popularity and became a massive shared cinematic universe, with almost all of their films having some sort of interconnectivity with each other. But Wright was still envisioning this film as a standalone story, and Wright still promised the film would be small-scaled to set up the origin story of Scott Lang. By October of 2013, production really started to ramp up with casting announcements, and Marvel staked out a July 2015 release date for the film, and filming was scheduled to take place at the Pinewood Atlanta Studios in Fayette County, Georgia. Marvel and Wright had narrowed their Scott Lang search down to Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Paul Rudd. Reportedly, it was Wright who wanted Rudd, while Marvel favored Gordon-Levitt, hoping to inject some more youth into the MCU at this time. By December, Paul Rudd had officially won the role, favored by Wright himself. While production had to be moved from the UK to the US due to the lack of sound stages. The next month, Michael Douglas signed on to play the original Ant-Man, Hank Pym, in what Wright and Feige described as a heist story, with Pym passing the Ant-Man mantle down to Scott Lang. Casting continued as Michael Pena signed on, Evangeline Lilly entered talks to play Pym's daughter, and Corey Stoll entered talks to play an unspecified role, which would later be confirmed to be Darren Cross, aka the main villain of the film. But with filming due to get underway in July of 2014, tensions began to arise between Wright and Marvel. Because at this point of production, there already has been a few versions for this film, and with each draft, Marvel continued to give additional notes. Throughout early 2014, Wright and Cornish wrote 2 additional drafts of the Ant-Man script, attempting to address Marvel's notes without compromising their vision. Marvel even began pushing the start of filming back from June to July to make time for these rewrites. And with every rewrite, Marvel continued to give the writing duo notes on their script, and this kind of led to the beginning of the end for Edgar Wright on Ant-Man. At this point of production, Marvel seemed eager to get filming done as soon as possible, because at this point they already delayed this movie enough and had to crack the script sooner rather than later. And when the script still wasn't to Marvel's liking, the studio commissioned a rewrite from some of its in-house writers, without Wright's input. It was when this draft of the script came back, lacking Wright's signature voice and style, with his vision being entirely homogenized. And this version of the film was definitely the script that ended up becoming the film we know today. With this draft focusing on being more connected with the wider world of the MCU, instead of this film being a small-scaled, disconnected story with no references to the overall MCU at the time. And that means in Wright's version, we wouldn't have had the scene of Lang stealing Stark tech leading to a fight against Falcon, and that beginning scene where we wouldn't have seen Hank Pym working alongside Howard Stark and Peggy Carter for S.H.I.E.L.D. Instead, the film would have opened with Hank Pym's Ant-Man in action for a flashback scene. But Marvel and Wright both had clashing visions, and the script was sort of the breaking point for Edgar Wright, because he was a filmmaker who wrote and directed all of his films. And this led to Wright leaving the project on May 23rd, 2014, roughly 2 months before filming was supposed to begin. The core issue was Wright's desire to create a self-contained story with a heist focus and less integration with the wider MCU. While Marvel wanted a film that could fit the mold of their other films, while also being very interconnected at the same time. Years later, Wright reflected on his exit and confirmed that the studio commissioned a draft of the script without his involvement. I wanted to make a Marvel movie, but I don't think they really wanted to make an Edgar Wright movie. I was the writer-director on it, and then they wanted to do a draft without me. And having written all of my other movies, that's a tough thing to move forward, thinking if I do one of these movies, I would like to be the writer-director. Suddenly, becoming a director for hire on it, you're sort of less emotionally invested, and you start to wonder why you're there, really. And alongside Wright, a good chunk of his crew left at the same time in development of the film. And in the summer of 2014, Feige claimed that they simply found out too late that Marvel and Wright weren't a good fit, stating, "I wish it wasn't as late in the day as it was, but it just had to become clear that there was an impasse that we had never reached before. We've worked with lots of unbelievably talented filmmakers like Edgar before, and of course, there are disagreements along the way. We had always found a way around it, a way to battle through it and emerge on the other side with a better product. It had become clear that both of us were being too polite over the past 8 years, I guess. Then it was clear that, oh, you're really not gonna stop talking about that note? Oh, you're really not gonna do that note? Alright, this isn't working." Cornish would state that only 35% of the finished film is material left over from his and Wright's version, even though the script is pretty much based on the same overall structure. The tone of the film would have changed significantly, and Evangeline Lilly shared that the biggest difference of both scripts was the tone, with Wright's script not treating itself as seriously, and his script was more fun and irrelevant, with Lilly describing it as a romp from beginning to end. Similar to Wright's previous films like the Trilogy and Scott Pilgrim, but still shared the same heart as those films. This immediately led to overall backlash from Wright's departure. Even directors from Marvel Studios, like Joss Whedon when he was working on Age of Ultron, and, like him or not, Joss Whedon has changed the way we see superhero movies with the first Avengers, and even popularized the season-long story arc, and fostered a vibrant online community through his work on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and was the first of its kind to have season-long arcs like this. And he responded to the issue stating, "I don't get it. I thought the script was not only the best script that Marvel had ever had, but the most Marvel script I've ever read. I had no interest in Ant-Man. Then, I read the script, and was like, of course, this is so good. It reminded me of the books when I read them, irreverent and funny, and could make what was the small scale and vice versa. I don't know where things went wrong, but I was very sad, because I thought, this is a no-brainer. This is Marvel getting it exactly right. Whatever dissonance that came, whatever it was, I don't understand why it was bigger than a marriage that seemed so right. But I'm not going to say it was definitely all Marvel, or Edgar's Gone Mad. I felt like they would complement each other by the ways that they were different, and something happened." This was definitely such a huge bummer, and not in a way like, oh, it might have been good, or Wright's signature style wouldn't translate well with a film at this big of a scale. But I believe this film could have been something really special, and it was definitely the outcome of two different overall visions for the film clashing. However, Wright would still stay on as an executive producer, which who knows how much he truly contributed moving on in this stage of production. And he and Cornish would still receive a story and screenwriting credit, alongside Adam McKay and Paul Rudd? Now I'm genuinely curious about how much he truly contributed to the film. Ultimately, Peyton Reed took over directing duties, and the released film differed significantly from Wright's original vision. I have no idea why he was put as a replacement for Wright, because his filmography is pretty non-existent at the time, and only really did Z-tier comedies and directed episodes of TV, most notably the forgotten but still pretty fun Back to the Future cartoon, and the Weird Al show? Oh hell yeah! It was probably most likely Marvel needed a director for dirt cheap, and fast, because they needed to keep that July 2015 release date, and Reed seemed definitely like a yes man, unlike Wright.
You're just some kind of yes man.
Yes, man.
Other directors that were under consideration included Ruben Fletcher, Rawson Marshall Thurber, Nicholas Stoller, Michael Dorse, and David Wayne? Dude, what the hell? We missed out on a David Wayne Ant-Man movie?
Hey, we're soulmates, right?
What? Yeah. Whatever, if you want.
Principal photography began on April 18th, 2014 in San Francisco, and wrapped on December 5th, 2014. And not much really happened. Filming ran smoothly. What do you want me to say? To drag out this video some more, let's go through some of the early examples of marketing for the film, shall we? Some of the first pieces of behind-the-scene footage was revealed officially in November of 2014. ABC aired a 1-hour television special titled Marvel 75 Years from Pulp to Pop, which featured some behind-the-scenes footage of Ant-Man. In the Marvel Comics February 2015 solicitations that was released in December of 2014, it revealed a 2-issue comic book tie-in series based off of the movie, focusing on Hank Pym as Ant-Man on a mission during the Cold War in the first issue, with a second issue focusing on Scott Lang and his past that was briefly touched upon in the finished film. And a month after those comic solicitations, Disney officially began the film's actual marketing campaign by releasing a miniature ant-sized teaser trailer, and a full-sized version was released the same day. Ha! I see what they did there! The trailer generated 29 million views worldwide in 3 days, the third largest viewership for a Marvel Studios film at the time, behind trailers for Iron Man 3 and Avengers Age of Ultron. Disney ended up spending $34.8 million on television advertising for the film. You know, TV spots and random ads galore. More than the $26.9 million spent for Avengers Age of Ultron, since the former was a new property, and the film was officially released on July 15th, 2015, in the United States for 3,800 theaters. It was calculated that the film profited a total of $103.9 million, accounting for production budgets, marketing, talent participations, and ended up getting some pretty good reviews, even after all the production shakeups, getting 83% from critics and 85% from casual audiences on Rotten Tomatoes. And look, I know the site isn't the most reliable, but at least it was a good sign that the film was a big hit. After Ant-Man released, the film became its own franchise, gaining 2 sequels that weren't very successful in the studio's eyes, especially due to the third installment, because of a variety of reasons, including Disney's updated corporate strategy and the decision to reduce spending on underperforming IPs in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I'm looking at you, Captain Marvel. Inevitably, Marvel was forced to reassess its crowded release schedule, despite the first two Ant-Man movies performing well critically and commercially. However, the third entry was not that, due to a bunch of production problems that are a whole different rabbit hole that I don't think we have time to mention because this video is long enough. However, this film did not perform well in the studio's eyes, seemingly sealing the fate of Ant-Man 4 in the process, and this whole franchise was inevitably lost in the crossfires of the many different restructurings at Marvel Studios. Now I know you're hearing this and going, but Spider-Knight, whatever happened to Edgar Wright after departing the film? Well, the story ends on a happy note for Wright, because he got to develop his longtime passion project that Wright was thinking about since 1995, when he was a struggling 21-year-old filmmaker living in suburban London. The good thing that came out of it is I kind of got to move on to Baby Driver, which was a script that I already have written. And maybe one of the ironies about it is I had this thought in the back of my head. Well, if the Marvel movie does well, maybe I'll have enough muscle to get Baby Driver made. And it's ironic, I guess, that I didn't make that movie and got Baby Driver made instead. And with a studio which, for an original movie, is very rare. And the other important thing for me is the entirety of my crew, who were gonna do that movie, sort of left in solidarity. So it was really important to me to get another film going so I could kind of re-employ them all. So the funny thing about Baby Driver is it pretty much features all of the heads of department who were gonna do the other movie with me. And the film ended up being a huge success, but maybe just ignore the controversial cast. Yeesh. But hey, the movie is still really fucking good. Trust me on that one. And Wright got to do whatever the fuck he wanted in this film, and it paid off big time. Plus, Wright is still making movies to this day, with 2021's Last Night in Soho, which I still haven't checked out yet, but it seems like the film has been forgotten in the midst of a little event called The Pandemic. But not to fret, because Wright actually has a new film coming out this November called The Running Man, which is a remake of the 1987 film of the same name, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, based on the 1982 novel by Stephen King. And he wrote this film with Michael Bacall, who wrote the 21 Jump Street reboot films, and collaborated with Wright on Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. And this film shows off Wright's fast-paced style and fun comedy. So I definitely think we're in for a treat when the film hits theaters in November. And I'm definitely seated. While the released version of Ant-Man is considered a fun and entertaining addition to the MCU, it's often contrasted with what could have been under Edgar Wright's direction. Many reviewers acknowledge that the final film, directed by Peyton Reed, lacks some of the unique stylistic flair and sharper comedic edge that Wright is known for. Some feel that the released film is a more conventional superhero movie, compared to Wright's more distinct vision, especially given how long the filmmaker worked on trying to bring that comic to life. While Peyton Reed's Ant-Man was a success, some fans and critics see Wright's departure as a missed opportunity to have a unique, auteur-driven film within the MCU. Ironically enough, perhaps Wright's version of Ant-Man could have ramped up production earlier in Marvel Studios' run before they established a foundational aesthetic and way of telling stories. Then, maybe this version of the film would have been made. However, at the same time, I really hope in the future, once the MCU gets rebooted after Avengers Secret Wars, because come on, like Thanos says, it's inevitable. I really hope we get to see a more comic-accurate portrayal of the Ant-Man franchise that focuses primarily on Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne. Because the older I've gotten, the more I've been drawn to these characters. Especially after my rewatch of Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes, but Hank Pym has the potential to be one of the most interesting characters in the MCU. With somebody with a lot of passion for these characters, maybe this could happen, perhaps one day. Anyways, thank you for watching. This video has taken a lot out of me. This is like the biggest video I've ever made. What can I say? This is unscripted, by the way. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe, all that jazz. I want to try to upload more often, but it's really hard. School just started up again, and it's a lot of fucking work, so I'm trying my best. But trust me, there are videos coming soon, and thank you for watching. And please like and subscribe.